Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're watching this in the world. I hope you guys are doing okay. So today I wanted to discuss this topic of character carrying. It's something that has been going on in the FGC for the longest time, and it's something that is very prevalent in Tekken right now. I'm sure it's very prevalent in Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter, but obviously I play a lot of Tekken. I don't really pay too much attention to the other games. I will be paying more attention to Street Fighter coming soon, but as of now my attention is on Tekken, and I've been hearing this conversation a lot, and I was going to put it off, and then I was going to talk about it, and then I was going to put it off, and then I was going to talk about it, and then it got to the point where almost every single time I'd play online, every single time I would play against people, it would be, oh, Feng carried you to victory. And I don't mind it doesn't bother me. But I did actually start to think about it, and I was starting to think that it might be a bit of an interesting conversation. Now, I have my own take on what character carrying is and when I think players are being carried by the character, and it's probably going to differ a little bit from the kinds of takes that I've heard so far. So bear with me, because I'm going to try and explain my point using several characters in several games and several talking points, and then obviously at the end of the video you can let me know if you agree or not. Now, originally I was going to make this exclusively about Feng Wei, although I realized that there's a much larger conversation. So what does it mean to have a character that carries you? A lot of people go straight to how strong the character is. So if your character is a top tier, and they're top tier to the point that they're probably much stronger than the rest of the cast and it's not very close, people will jump to you're carried by your character. And I think character carrying, when you're talking about strength, has varying degrees. The reason that I believe this is that I believe you can have a strong character that can definitely carry people to victory. There's no doubt about that. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but there is a bit of nuance when the character is very difficult. Now, instead of using Feng Wei as an example, because I don't think he is of the difficulty that I'm referring to here, I'm going to use Akuma in Tekken 7. A lot of the time you would hear people saying Akuma carries in Tekken 7, and I never agreed with this, and let me explain why. Akuma is undoubtedly the strongest character in Tekken 7. I would say it's not even close. Akuma can do things in Tekken 7 that nobody else can, and when he does them correctly, you're going to pay for it big time. The problem here with the conversation is that whilst Akuma is the strongest character in the game, he is also leaps and bounds one of the hardest characters in the game. Some might say the hardest character in the game. I know there's an argument to say, hey, Hachi might have been, or Jin, or Brian. I personally think to play at a very high level, with the level of execution you need to have to be effective with Akuma and turned on at all times, and also manage your meter, I think Akuma might have been the hardest character to play at a high level. Now, I know that might be a controversial opinion. I know it's an opinion shared by some, but not by all. You can let me know what you think in the comment section. And then if you look at Akuma's character usage in Tekken 7, he barely showed up. And when he did show up, the person using him usually wasn't good enough to utilize Akuma's attributes to the point that would take them to victory. So whenever I would come up against an Akuma player, I always knew I was going to win. And I shit you not, I think I beat every single Akuma player that I came up against in ranked on Tekken 7. I can't remember being run over by an Akuma player. And that is knowing that Akuma is the best character in the game. Why is that? Whilst Akuma is the strongest character, like I said, he's extremely difficult to use. And if you do find somebody that is really good with the character, yes, you're in for a long night. But most people are not Super Akuma. Most people are not Artif, but they're not going to be doing the ridiculous things needed to make Akuma that busted character. So then to what degree is Akuma carrying? Because most of the player base can't even use him properly. So when someone says Akuma carried you to victory, I have to look at the player and wonder, are they a Super Akuma? Because if they're a Super Akuma, then we're talking about a different character entirely. Super Akuma uses Akuma on a level that most people will never reach. And so if you get to that level and you get to unlock that side of Akuma with your skills, then yes, the argument might come into place when you're in tournament and you're fighting other top tiers, or just other characters in general. But when you're playing online and you're fighting regular people, these regular people are working very hard to do very little because the character requires so much. So I kind of shrug off the you're carried by Akuma argument, because like I said, 9 times out of 10 people can't use the character anyway. I would go as far as to say that you're probably more carried by playing a character like Julia, for example, or Marduk, or Elisa, or Lars. Whilst these characters are not as good as Akuma, they are astronomically easier. You don't really have to use as much brain power to get from point A to point B. You're working much less. So even though the output of the character is less, your output is also less. The amount that you have to think about is astronomically lower than the Akuma player. So who's really carried in that situation? I think it would be fair to say that the lack of skill by said player, potentially that is a Marduk player or a Lisa player or Lars player, is carried by the fact that the character doesn't require them to be of high skill. So in that instance, I would say that there are probably more carried people in Tekken 7 playing lower tier characters than there are the Akuma players. I think the same can also be said for Alpha Patroclus in Soul Calibur 5. Now on paper, Alpha Patroclus is the strongest character. I don't think anybody would really argue with that. Maybe they will. He was the strongest character to me. The only problem with Alpha Patroclus is that it was so impractical to do everything required of him in a match consistently that he was getting beaten by the other characters that were considered strong, like Mitsurugi for example, Ivy, Omega Pyrrha, and even later down the line Algo. Now when I was playing Soul Calibur 5, I identified the fact that yes, this Alpha Patroclus guy is ridiculous on paper, and if somebody could do all of this consistently in battle, yeah, you're probably not going to beat this character. He's just too stupid. But to pull off those just frames on everything over and over again to make things safe is too much work. I may as well pick another top tier that doesn't require as much work. Now there's 2 points of this conversation. I believe that Algo carried me to a lot of victories in Soul Calibur 5, but I believe it for 2 reasons. One is he wasn't the best character in the game, but he was definitely up there. There was an argument to be made that he was top 3 or top 5. And 2, nobody was using him. And this is a point that is going to link to Tekken 8 as well, with characters like the Bears. Nobody was using Algo, and so it became a knowledge check situation. When you're using a character that nobody's using, there is a little bit of carrying going on. Now obviously the onus is on the opponent to figure out the character and learn what to do, but you would be lying if you said that the fact that people don't know what's going on with your character is not carrying you to victory. I knew playing Algo, I knew how powerful he was, even though most people at the time didn't seem to figure it out. I knew the character was ridiculous and he was quite low effort in comparison to Alpha Patroclus. And so knowledge checks carried me to several tournament victories, to several high tournament placings, and as I've said multiple times on this channel with receipts, I was the #1 Soul Calibur player in the world for a very long time on ranked. And from what I could see, I was the only Algo player in the top bracket at that time. So I had a strong character that was also relatively easy. You take away that hard factor. Now I'm not ashamed to admit that I'm not the most skillful fighting game player, but I'm not stupid either. And because I understand the limits of my skills, sometimes I'll pick characters to carry that for me, to carry the load, so to speak. And this is where I think characters like the Bears come into it. Panda and Kuma are very underused characters, and they're underused because generally they're just not as strong as a lot of the other characters on the roster. But we've seen what happens with situations like this. I believe the player's name is Rangchu, who used Panda in the Tekken World Tour during Tekken 7 against characters that were undoubtedly better than Panda, and he went on to win the Tekken World Tour. Now it's not to say Panda's not viable, of course they are. Everybody in Tekken 7 would be considered viable. The issue is that nobody knew how to fight the characters. I remember the commentator saying, nobody knows what's going on. This is a part of character carrying in my opinion. I know some people might not agree with that, but sometimes I look at a fighting game and I look to see who's powerful and not being used. I remember when I picked up Negan, I believed Negan to be a strong character. It wasn't until later down the line that more and more people started to catch on, and then people would learn the matchup. But when I played Negan, which was pretty much when he came out, people weren't using him, they weren't interested, and I was running people over purely because they didn't know what was going on. That is a part of character carrying. Now you're probably sitting behind the monitor thinking that this is a load of bullshit, I'm not carried by my character. And there's nothing wrong with admitting the fact that the player base may not understand your character and so you're getting away with murder. Those things happen in fighting games, especially when rosters are very big. Some characters will go under the radar and some players will identify that and they'll use that as a way to get wins before people catch on to the matchup. So you've got strong characters that are hard to use, strong characters that are easy to use, and you've got strong characters or weak characters that are not being used by anybody. Now in the case of Tekken 8, I think people are looking at this the wrong way. Now I watched the main man's video on Feng Wei, and I'm going to use Feng Wei as a marker here because he's been a point of contention, and everything the main man said in his video was true. Feng Wei has a lot of ridiculous buttons. So why is it then that he is in the bottom 12 or bottom 10 of used characters in Tekken 8? Why is it that at Combo Breaker we saw one Feng Wei player who was, no disrespect to the guy, not very good, and then we saw Ni, and Ni switched him out for Brian very quickly and we never saw Feng again? Why is it in 3 days we barely saw Feng Wei, despite being apparently the strongest character in the game? The reason for this is that although Feng Wei is strong, undoubtedly, and nobody would argue with that, a lot of people can't use him effectively. The reason they can't use him effectively is because Feng Wei is not one of those characters where you press triangle square, and the character is just swinging at you relentlessly or spinning at you on the stage over and over again like Lars or Reina and disorientating the player. Now Feng Wei can do that, but I don't think it's to the level that those characters do it. There's a lot of anime BS going on with characters like Lars, characters like Reina, characters like Victor, where they're teleporting around the stage. A lot of people will say, oh, you're carried by Feng. And again, I don't want anyone to think that I take offense to that. If anything, I find it funny, I lean into it, but I do want to explore the conversation a little bit. If so many people think Feng is this powerful, why is he not being picked at tournaments outside of Ni and Joker, two of the best players in the world, which might lend more to my point about you needing to be of a higher skill to use him effectively? Why is he only being represented in 2% of the player base? I mean, if he's carrying people, he's pretty much carrying me and Bob down the road because nobody's using him. Now, one of the reasons that his win percentage might be higher than some players is he is very strong and nobody's using him. But I do think it begs the question, why is nobody using the strongest character in the game? Why are people opting for Victor, for Lily, for Jin? Oh, don't get me started on Jin. Jin was all over Combo Breaker. Why is that? It's because these characters, whilst they may not be as strong as Feng Wei, they are much more stupid than Feng Wei. They don't require as much thought process into their game plan. They don't require you to learn the game as much. They have a lot of dumb buttons. For example, Jin's forward 2, his Demon Palm, is a very spammable move. If you go through Feng Wei's moveset, Feng Wei's moveset is full of powerful attacks. But the difference between Feng Wei and Jin is that Feng Wei requires you to use most of his attacks. Feng Wei has always been known, to me at least, a character that kills you by 1,000 cuts, right? They say death by 1,000 cuts. Jin, in main man's own words, can be a 2-button character. Down 2, forward 2. Those two moves are so spammable that there's no wonder that Jin was overrepresented at Combo Breaker. Every other match was Jin, and if it wasn't Jin, it was Victor. So again, I'm gonna ask players, why is it that you guys are picking Victor, picking Jin, picking Lily, picking these same characters over and over again, and the character that everybody's saying is carried is not getting picked? I think real character carrying, at least in this situation, is based on skill level and ease of use. Now, I wouldn't say anybody in Tekken 8 is particularly difficult to use compared to previous iterations, but there's varying degrees of skill here. The reason that Jin and Victor and Lily and these kinds of characters are being picked, even though players identify Feng being stronger, is that Feng requires them to work a little bit harder. And a lot of players will say, oh, well, I'm playing my favorite character. Now, there are some people that are character loyalists. I recognize those people. They won't switch no matter what. But there are a lot of people that are not. There's a lot of people that were not playing Dragunov that are playing Dragunov now, because Dragunov is a very powerful character. But Dragunov is much easier to use than Feng Wei. And so that's why you're seeing an overabundance of Dragunovs, but you're not seeing that many Fengs. So again, to reiterate, in Tekken 8, I believe true character carrying comes from ease of use. Who can I switch my brain off with the most and do the most with? Which moves are heavily spammable and I can rely on? Victor has multiple running attacks. He has his teleport, for example, that you see players spamming over and over again. To me, it would seem like you would pick the character that is going to grant you the most wins. Surely that would be the strongest character. This is the same reason why you didn't really see Akuma very often, despite Akuma being the best character in the game. Now again, I'm not saying Feng Wei is as strong as Akuma. I'm not saying Feng Wei is as strong or as difficult to use as Alpha Patroclus, but there's a reason why these top tiers are not seen as much. It's because players often need something to lean on. I don't mean to sound that offensively, but it was true for me in Soul Calibur 5. I wasn't the best player with all the other characters. I found the character that lent to my skill set, and I went on to do very well with them. That character allowed me to do things that I wouldn't be able to do with other characters because I didn't have the skills to do it. I think that's also the case in Tekken 8. A lot of people are saying that so-and-so character is carrying. This character is getting in the way of murder. But from what I can see, there's an overrepresentation of certain characters because certain characters just don't require you to think that much. Otherwise, you would have seen Akumas everywhere. You would have seen Alpha Patroclus everywhere, and we would be seeing Feng Wei everywhere, and that's just not the case. Maybe that will change over time. I don't think it will unless there are significant buffs and nerfs. The game in its current state allows players to pick characters like Victor and essentially not play Tekken. You may think Feng Wei is strong, but Feng Wei is playing Tekken. You may think Kazuya is strong, but Kazuya is playing Tekken. A lot of these characters are compensating for the lack of skill in a lot of players. Now I know that this is probably going to offend people, it's probably taking shots at people, but I did want to have the discussion. Now like I said, I don't mind people saying that I'm carried by Feng, it doesn't bother me, but I did think it was interesting because when I sat back and I thought about it, I thought to myself, why would people be picking characters that they think are weaker? Because let's be honest, there's not many people out there that think Victor is the best character in the game. All of these Jin fans that came out of nowhere, let's not kid ourselves. The overabundance of Beyblade spinning Lars players, come on now. I know a lot of you are not Naruto Ultimate Ninja Storm fans, you're picking the character because the character's Unga Bunga. Let's just be honest with ourselves. In my opinion, to reiterate one more time, I think the true character carrying comes from how easy is the character and how much can I do without actually having to apply myself. Anyways guys, sorry to offend some of you, hope you enjoyed the video, take care and peace.